Welcome to GovCon Unscripted, where we dive into the unfiltered stories and strategies from all around the world of government contracting. Join host Chelsea Roberts as she explores how to navigate, thrive, and win in this complex but lucrative industry.
All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to GovCon Unscripted. I'm your host, Chelsea Roberts, CEO of Collaborative Compositions. And today I've got with us Lisa Sherwin Wulf, marketing consultant for LSW Marketing. Lisa, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, thanks so much for having me today. I am the founder and a marketing consultant at LSW Marketing. I work with B2B and B2G technology companies, helping them market to the public sector. Everything from increasing awareness, driving demand, accelerating growth. So I do personalized, very hands-on work, depending on what their needs are. Everything from advisory calls and marketing plan reviews to full marketing strategy and plan development and execution. I also do fractional leadership here and there as needed. I went out on my own 3 years ago to really focus on helping companies either expand into the public sector for the first time, advance or accelerate things that they were already doing, or also sometimes transitioning from Fed to SLED or SLED to Fed and help driving that growth through marketing. And I work with companies of all sizes, everything from small startups to billion-dollar companies across all Fed, DoD, state and local, K-12 and higher ed. And before I went out on my own, my last role before that, I was leading America's marketing and public sector at SolarWinds. And before that, I worked at a number of companies in the space, Deltek, Right Now Technologies, and also Software AG. And then also in my spare time, I'm working on co-authoring a book with Mark Amtower focused on B2G events for marketers and anyone going to an event in GovCon to help them get the most out of their investments.
Ooh, I've got a lot to say on that topic. So I might have to drop in for a chapter on that book or something. Absolutely. Would love to get back into that conversation. Wow, that's big names like SolarWinds, Deltek. Those are big companies. So it's quite a jump to go out on your own after you've had the experience in working with such big cover and having that support or sometimes lack of support, which can be a jumping reason for folks to go out on their own. But what are some of the things that you found that have been most challenging for you now that you've been doing it a while, you're 3 years in, working across, I'm assuming, different industries? Where have the challenges arisen?
I am. It's interesting. The biggest challenge I'm seeing, and it's pretty consistent as I'm talking to prospective customers and then with some customers who have struggled with growth, it's sticking with the decision to really focus on marketing. It's that expectation of we're going to do marketing and we're going to just start when the RFP is coming out and we're going to see all these amazing returns in 6 to 8 weeks. Because it just magically happens like that.
It does. Of course. Yes, this has to be reality.
Definitely. And although I was with a lot of big name organizations over the years, before that I actually worked at some very small startups as well as mid-sized startups. And I like to build things. So I was with startup divisions within those big companies. So we were building things from the ground up, but we had the budget and the backing from the larger organization. When I was at Deltek, I was there during the Input and Fed Sources acquisition, actually working in a group that was a different, smaller startup that they bought before them and then merged them all together. So that's one of the biggest things that I've seen. Yes.
I feel having a holding firm to any decision in this environment is not always easy. It tends to be, okay, if I don't start seeing something happen from it immediately, then my decision starts to come into question and I start to second guess and I start to think, okay, is that something that I really should have done? Did I put myself into a bad position here? So how do you help some of those folks come across that or come through that challenge and out the other side and recognize the fact that everybody has to market, and if you're not spending the time and you're not focusing your energy and your effort on marketing your solution, then how are people supposed to know about it?
Exactly. Or you may have some success without marketing, but at a certain point you're going to slow. Or for example, there could be a massive change within the agency that you're working with, and the majority of your key contacts may all leave. So it could completely shift and turn on its head. I am a firm believer in that you need to have a strategy and not just, I want to do a webinar or I want to post on LinkedIn. So you have to look at what it is you're trying to achieve. And then I'm a firm believer in setting KPIs. So although you may not see that end result, especially in a market where it can take 18 to 24 months, depending on what you do and where you're focused, to actually get the one business before you even start delivering on it. So you have to have indicators as to what kind of progress you're having. And that's where I often see people freak out is all the indicators are saying that we're going the right direction. Like this metric is going up, or oh, we did do webinars and registers were great and people turned out and you had conversations afterwards, but the business hasn't closed yet. And I often see that impatience with companies that have done commercial first. Can't we just run some Google paid and we're going to get some trials and everybody's going to raise their hand and be ready to buy something right away? And that doesn't happen. In fact, the call to actions that public sector responds to and that helps qualify them are often not the same as in the commercial space. If you can use the data and the information and look at what's really happening and set your expectations accordingly, you can get unstuck.
Interesting. Now, I want to dig into that just a little further and tell me like some of the KPIs that you like to use. I'm desperately curious to know how you're marking progress on some of these things from the high level. Just look like, oh, okay, yeah, like we did that and it seemed to be successful, but how are they defining success? Like what kind of key indicators are you pulling that says that it was or wasn't?
So it's going to come with the caveat of it is different for every company based on
Sure.
what services you offer, who your agencies are. But depending, using your kind of traditional marketing mix sort of stuff, it can be everything from time on your website to number of LinkedIn followers to engagement with content, clicks on content. Is your organic traffic rising? Did you go to an event and you had more booth leads than in the past that then led to a meeting? Did you have less leads, but more meetings set so things were higher quality? If you did a webinar, not just were there registrations and how many people turned out, because I firmly believe that people who don't show up are still qualified enough to pursue a conversation with because they signed up for a reason.
Yeah.
And just because they didn't attend doesn't mean they don't still have that problem. Just means they might have had a fire at work or they got busy or their calendar reminder didn't go off that day. So you would then want to look at like how many views after the webinar, how many meetings did you get booked? How many people went on to consume another piece of content? Is someone actively engaging on your website? Are you lucky enough to have the tech stack? Not everyone does, especially if you're small, but can you see what domains were visiting your website? And you're seeing a rise within domains that are within your target agencies. There's different indicator metrics, especially things like time on your website or engagement with content or reading of content, because if that's rising, clearly people are doing research on you.
Yeah, that's something that I think I probably have access to, but I've never just taken into full consideration because I'm just like, it's a click or they've gone through and they looked, and I'm really not pulling those stats that quantify the value or the number of times or the amount of effort that they are putting in to spend on my page or to spend with my content. And ultimately, I feel like I fall into that group of people who oftentimes my calendar didn't sync and I really wanted to attend that, but I didn't get there and I'm really sorry, but I really want this content. So please send me all the follow-ups and all that stuff. So I would definitely say that all those folks that didn't make it to the webinar or that still registered or expressed some interest in it, I think those are absolutely qualified and valid folks to keep a pulse on, at least. Probably not like bug on a regularity, but just keep a pulse on and make sure that you're following up with them with adequate content. What are some other things that you suggest, especially just taking this into consideration, the fact that the environment that we're in has changed? You mentioned it earlier, people at agencies have left, like people have really no idea how to refocus and pivot their marketing strategies, if they should, or if they should just keep doing what they've always done and they're just doing it to new people now. What are some of the big changes that you've seen in marketing since, I guess, the change of the administration over a year ago?
So this is a change I'd like to see more of, and I haven't heard about it as much. I think that more companies should take a step back and revisit their awareness strategy and focus more as if they were newer to market on how are they building engagement, how are they building awareness, how are they making sure people know what they do now? Because you might have been in the market and be very well known.
Sure.
But if it's new leadership at the agency and they come from a different space, they don't know who you are. So you're having to go back and do some of that early, more foundational marketing type of approaches than you have probably done in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on how long you've been in the space. And I think that's a gap that people aren't addressing enough. They're assuming I just have relationships, I'm going to prospect in, I'm going to keep doing the same messaging because it was working, not realizing that there's a whole new slew of people who are very top of funnel, or maybe they're familiar with them, but they're familiar with what you were doing 3 years ago with the pace of change in technology. What we're doing today for services may not be the same as what you were doing even 2 years ago. And with the heavy focus on AI and so much modernization and transformation still out in the market and all of that, I think that's something people don't really think about. Can make you really uncomfortable to think, oh, I don't need to tell people who I am. Everybody knows who we are. We're really well known in that agency. What could change for you if you went back and added some more top of funnel awareness stuff into the mix, did a bigger push on LinkedIn, organic content? Like, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of money to do this kind of thing. You just have to put some focus and some content that's quality around it. So that's, I think, the biggest change.
When you say like top of funnel content, what kinds of things are you talking about?
It varies a little bit based on what you do. And it also comes with the caveat of it's not a funnel anymore. We still use that language. It hasn't been a funnel in like everybody consumes things at different stages. But if you have any sort of volume of lead gen, you can look at your data and say, okay, people who do these types of activities are more likely to then become an opportunity down the road. So you can try and drag people into them. But for awareness and top of funnel, things that are more like thought leadership, educational, non-salesy, you're talking about how to solve a problem. Oh, by the way, that's a problem we solve, but we're not going to be in your face pitching. Here, we're going to give you something useful to help you address that problem. So it can be anything from like video, just content post on LinkedIn, an article, blog, an executive brief. White papers are still a thing. They're not going away. They're often used further down funnel too, but some people like to read them early on. And if you do a good piece of long content, you can cut it up into snippets and use it a whole slew of places, and it can become other things. And I like webinars for awareness as well. It needs to be the right topic. Nothing really here, come see a demo of exactly what we do.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. I see a lot of leveraging of opportunities that I wouldn't necessarily think are good sales pitch times. Like, I can't tell you the last time that I got on a webinar and was like, this is really great content. And they didn't have an ask at the end of it where it's, please subscribe, please pay now, please sign up. And I'm like, I totally get the ask, but there has to be some balance there of we just want to provide genuinely helpful information. And then if you need help with that, follow up with us and reach out and do the work to get a hold of us. I think that there's definitely a time and place for that really salesy. Now you've made it to the bottom. Let's go. Now we know that you want to sign up. You've done all the things. So I think that there's just like a difference there. And I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on evergreen content. There was a time there where it was like, okay, great. We're never going to have to come up with content again because this is always going to be 100% relevant. And it's always going to be things that we can just like slice, dice, like mix, match, repair, and then repost. And then it's still going to be absolutely as relevant. And I'm curious, do you think that evergreen content that was dubbed as much like 3 years ago is still like useful, valid, and evergreen these days?
Yeah, so much. Yes. Now, it may be that you are creating a new piece of content now that addresses some type of new technology that turns into future evergreen, but I am a huge believer in evergreen. I think that you need to use the data about what's happening with the content and market to gauge, do I keep it? Do I refresh it? Is it working? I often find people want to kill content because they're tired of seeing it.
Yeah.
Not because it stopped working in the market. It was a couple of years ago, back when I was in house, but I had a 6-year-old white paper that refreshed 3 times that was still performing. And people were like, why are we still marketing that white paper? Because it's performing better than anything else. You do need to refresh the landing page, the content. You need to make tweaks to help with SEO and with discoverability by AI, and just to make sure that it's still current. But I think it feels good to always be creating new content and that
Yeah.
it is important to have new things, but a quality piece that's still delivering, especially in a market that's highly education focused. And I think depending on whether it's all industry or just public sector, and it could even be an underreport, but they say 60 to 70% of research on a company is done by people before they ever speak to a person at your company.
Oh, yeah.
So
That makes
like in
sense.
that webinar example you were talking about before, yeah, you want to have a call to action, contact us if you need help. But why don't you offer up other content that takes people further along on that same topic that the webinar was on? Because if they're on that self-discovery, the easier you make it for them to consume content and look at something else and educate and raise their hand or be more ready to say yes when you call them, the better. So yeah, I
Interesting.
love evergreen content.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of it. I have not yet figured out the best way to leverage and make evergreen content new, fresh, and flashy again. So we have an offline conversation to have about that. But there's so many things that I can point to where it's like people are experiencing these same things. They have the same question. They're still asking about it. And it's not that piece of content didn't answer it fully. It's just that it got buried by everything else that was dumped on and all the other the news feed that's just 24/7 adding new materials and putting in the recycle. And it's just that I personally haven't brought it up in this amount of time and I haven't put it back out there and been like, hey guys, remember this? I know y'all are still curious about it, so let's have a conversation based on this revised, refreshed piece of content. So I think that's really important for people to be aware of, that it still does work and there are still avenues that are valuable there for pieces of evergreen content that have been developed in years past. I'm really curious. So you mentioned something that I don't touch with a 10-foot pole. I stay very clear of it, commercial world and the B2B type stuff. So B2B teaming, I get that, but it's all in the mind of public sector and all in the mind of going for federal contracting. And I'm curious, what as some of those big sort of differences between marketing to commercial and marketing to federal, and even on top of that, some of those differences that you see between Fed and SLED, because I know that's a big conversation that's been coming up lately too.
Definitely. So I spent the better part of 20 years of my in-house career, and a lot of my client work has been this too, with commercial companies who were starting a public sector group. Okay. Usually with Fed, but the last few years it's been more starting with SLED because things have changed so much. So usually there's an existing marketing rhythm. They go to events, they have a paid online strategy. Everything is heavily performance marketing dominated if they're a SaaS company. I do work with services, but most of it's been software focused, either SaaS or on-prem or both. And so the original assumption is we're just going to do what we did, go to a couple events, maybe stand up a public sector section of the website, and it's all going to work the same. And
Yes.
So one of the conversations that I usually have is it's not going to work the same. You can usually look at the data and see that pretty clearly. And I like to use an example. Back when I was at SolarWinds, we were revamping the public sector section of the website. And SolarWinds had an amazing tried and true model of free trials of the software. And
Sure.
that was what the call to action in the entire commercial website was optimized for. But all the data shows me that the public sector people aren't going to do that until they talk to a person who sends them the trial keys. So let's run an experiment and optimize the entire public sector website for the contact us, fill in the blank, tell us what you're interested in. Far and away, worked like a charm, actually had a conversion rate to opportunity. I want to say it was 5% higher than trials had been on the other side of the website. So it turned into this tried and true run rate, but I used the data to help make that case.
Okay.
And the sales cycles are often longer. There's much less of a tolerance for pitching and selling. It's education and informative and relationship building. Even if it's an enterprise focus on the commercial side, in the commercial space, you can do all kinds of things you can't do in public sector. Yeah. You can host fancy high-end networking events. You can woo people with virtual experiences where they get a cooking kit and have a Michelin star chef experience and bourbon tastings and all of these things that you cannot do on the other side.
Oh man.
All about quality content advice, how can you help, personal relationships. So
Mhm.
that's like the biggest change that I see in the companies that invest in doing things differently but complementary, because you
Right.
always get business from what the company does in the market anyway. That does
Right.
help, but if you focus your energy on the what's different and how do we show up in these places, that's what accelerates and drives that public sector growth, both in Fed and SLED. And so Fed and SLED, oh, I have lived through so many reorgs and how do we put it together? And we're going to go from Fed into SLED and we're just going to go to every state at the same time, or we're not going to do research, or we're going to go after the top 10 states. But depending on what you offer, I was doing a networking call with someone. They were working with a startup that had this really cool product, but that product actually helped states that were really poor more because of what it was focused on, the problem it was solving. So they were getting huge contracts from like Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana and all these other states that nobody would normally focus after. But they had done their homework and they saw that actually the states that were spending money on this particular problem weren't California and Florida and New York and Texas and all of those. So I think doing that due diligence and not assuming that a rep can just magically sell into state and local or education.
Yeah.
Or assuming that all SLED is the same. States are not going to buy the same as a university, which is not going to buy the same as K through 12, which may actually end up coming in through your local. And there are programs, you can market things to all your audiences at once if you put some thought into it and you have the right language. But I think one of the other mistakes is I'm just going to go to a lot of events. Yeah, you could spend $500,000 really fast in state and local if all you're going to do is go to in-person events, which could be costing you $10,000 to $15,000 an event, because there are not a lot of like $1,500 tabletops that just get you into a state like there are in the Fed market. So it's a big shift. I've seen it done really well, and I've seen a lot of struggles. Oh, I went with a vertical strategy where I was just going to have my rep who sold into like HHS sell in at the state level, but we don't have any contract vehicles and they don't have any experience and we don't have a way to do market research and we're just going after every state. But then I've also seen great success with, we have this solution that can be bought by state Department of Transportations. And so we're going to vertically market across the whole country because, and I think underestimating the power of digital and virtual versus in person because of the geographic distribution within the SLED market, unlike Fed, where you can do a lot more live events. I love hybrid and virtual events. I've seen them deliver as much or more pipeline as an in-person. It just depends on your approach and your follow-up.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that is one of those, I guess, cautionary nuances that I constantly observe. And I'm like, man, Fed is so condensed and it's so easy to wrap my brain around and understand where my stakeholders are going to be, where they are. And I don't feel like I have to have a personal in-residence tie to every individual location. That is definitely an approach for some folks, but I feel like I can remain in place where I am and meet them like virtually or go there in person occasionally and make my presence known. But with SLED, it's almost overwhelming for me because I'm like, there's so many states, there's so many localities within those states. And I'm like, do I have to have somebody that lives in each one of these different localities in each one of these different states that I'm trying to approach, that I'm trying to have them build these relationships on a personal level? And one thing that I feel like I've seen not enough of is really SLED focused events that are multi-state, or they address a number of different states within that SLED market and try to bring them together as a whole to either have some sort of purchasing collective or have some sort of like common knowledge of, okay, this is what they're doing and it's really working for them. So I'm curious, do you see a lot of individuality have to come down to like the marketing approaches and the strategies on the SLED side? Or can you say we really work well with departments of transportation and they're all the same across the US? So we're just going to target that group? Like, how does that work?
I sound a little broken record, but it starts with that strategy discovery stage, like
Sure.
digging into what is the offering and is it unique to a specific vertical or not? Or do you just have a lot of reference cases? Interestingly, when you start to get into the space, and SLED is actually a larger market than Fed. You just don't think about it that way. I won't remember the exact statistic, but it's larger, which people don't really think about because each state is, some of them are not that large. There are, once you get into it, there's like NASIO that brings together state CIOs. There's National Association of Technology Directors. There's National Association of Counties. But similarly to federal, there's policy and administration and operational focused things. And then there's technology focused things. So depending on what you do, unless you have very large budgets, if you start going to all of those policy focused, non-technology, not in your sweet spot events, you're going to burn budget really fast. And you're not going to make a lot of progress. If you get really focused on what is the attendee list data, like what are the orgs going, what are the titles, are these the right people? And it's more of a preponderance. It really helps you. And like there's NERCOMP and EDUCAUSE on the higher ed side that are like regional New England and CIOs across the country. So there's opportunities. You just have to dig in a little bit and look at where you're focused.
I find that there's an association for just about everything that I didn't even realize coming into this market. Like my neighbor is a part of the National Rotary Club Association and does magazine pitches for them. And I'm like, wow, okay, there's an association or a club for everything, which is enlightening and it's motivating because it means that there is definitely an audience out there. It's just about finding them, right?
It's funny, my first job before I went into technology was at an association.
I love that. Yes. So I'm curious, in terms of like advice that you're handing out to folks these days, what are the biggest general tips that you have for folks that are finding that they're feeling stuck, they're feeling confused, they're not sure what they should do next to either revamp or get their marketing back on track? Or what are some of the tips that you're offering?
Pausing for a sec because I'm thinking, because I have a couple things that and I think that's the perfect type of place. And I'm not just saying this because this is what I do, but I think talking to someone else, either another company where it's somebody that you trust, talk to someone with marketing expertise to pick their brain. And are you stuck because you're tired of what you're working on? Or are you stuck because it's working? Are you stuck because you don't know what you want to do next? And I think making a plan and being realistic about your resources. If you built a big, gigantic marketing plan and you're feeling like you can't get it all done, but the plan that you built actually requires 3 times the budget that you have and people that you don't have, or everyone that volunteered and said they would help create content is also billable, and it's not bad intentions, just nobody has the capacity to help do that. So taking a step back and realistically saying, okay, what can we achieve? And I know there's a lot of interest and frustration in some spots on everybody's using AI and AI is just going to create all this content for me, or I'm using AI to create content and it's not getting me any results. It's like any other technology trend and any other tech. Are you putting the right stuff in? Do you have the right prompts? If you put garbage in, or you don't put the time up front to like really give it guidance, like words not to use, asking it to audit itself to make sure that it doesn't sound like AI, asking it to give you feedback based on the persona you're trying to reach. You can get very stuck with that because activity doesn't necessarily mean results. You might do half the things with better return if you're able to better focus on that. So that's a lot of the places that I commonly see people needing advice or help around.
Interesting. And you touched on a big buzzword there that we have to touch on, at least in the last couple of minutes here, and that's AI. So first of all, hard charging question here. Do you feel like AI is going to take your job? And then as a follow-on to that, where do you feel like AI is best put to good use?
I don't think AI is going to take my job. I do think that it is already impacting people's jobs, and there are pullbacks across where they're saying AI is going to do this instead. And then companies encounter problems and are like, that didn't work the way we thought, and we lost a year. Because there's things that I've lived and experienced that even a very well-trained AI can't replicate. I think AI is incredibly beneficial in a slew of operational and execution things that just take time. Like I needed to research for a client what competitors were going to be on the show floor in an event that they were going to. Well, the olden days, I would have sat there and read the entire exhibitor list, hand-picked them all out. And so I dumped it all into AI and went off and did something else while AI went and compared their competitor list and gave me a list of every company, their booth number, any messaging from the event, and it was all done. So we knew what we needed from that event. I like it for content creation, but not like drafting the entire thing. I like it for copy editing, brainstorming, iteration, making things better. Sometimes the first draft, but there's always a very human element involved. I know some people using it for video creation, podcast editing, all kinds of things. So I think it really has the ability to help with productivity and to free up time to do the things that are more complicated. I grew up reading sci-fi, and there's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
What you give AI to do and what level of access you give it, especially in public sector, there's security implications.
Right.
You need guidance and policies for your employees, including marketing, around what people should and shouldn't do, because you don't want to end up in a situation where someone fed like all of your internal only messaging into a public AI without having training turned off. And now that's become part of the learning for that LLM.
Yeah.
Not good, but it happens more often than you'd like to think.
Yeah. I hope I'm absolutely wrong on this, but I predicted that there's probably going to be a number of slightly scandalous, if not full-on scandals that come out that are like, oh, wow, okay, this person dumped a ton of CUI into this thing and then forgot to turn training off and then forgot that it was also like open to others and it was going to be leveraged and used by others. So I think that there's definitely a place for using it, and there are smart ways to use it. And then there are just dangerous ways to use it, and to try to think that like to put your full trust into a tool that you haven't yet set policy for seems just a little worrisome from my perspective. So I think that's absolutely a valuable piece of advice, is establish some policies for it, get some ground rules in place, and then train people on the best and inappropriate ways of using it so that they can avoid making some of those mistakes that could cost your business. It could cost you. It could do a lot of damage if not properly regulated, for sure. So for folks out there that want to get a hold of you and folks that want to reach out, how can they get a hold of you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. Just search Lisa Sherwin Wulf. The last name is a bit of an unusual spelling. The Sherwin part's easy, but it's WULF as in Frank. So you can find me searching on that. And then my website's lswmarketing.com. So both of those have contact info for me on them. Love to connect with people on LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn company page for LSW Marketing too, but you can also connect with me personally as well. And then I think you mentioned you also wanted to chat cocktails for a minute.
Yes, I was going to say,
for fun.
but yes.
For fun, my husband and I, back in 2014, actually went to a cocktail conference and came home, and my husband said, there's events and conferences and associations for everything.
Yes.
So there is one for the cocktail industry. So he came home and said, I want to start a blog. Okay, I work in marketing. We can do that. So we're still doing it all these years later, and turned it into sort of a small side business. So we're focused on home bartending and cocktails for home bartenders. And then we've also done some custom cocktail creation, corporate events. Before COVID hit, he actually did an event for GovExec where he created a custom cocktail for each of their publications for their fall market preview event for marketers. So it's interesting how my worlds combined, because I'd always been in events in public sector. In marketing, so I was doing events and we theme things, and there were drinks involved, networking receptions. And so we've also got that. And you can find that at Wolf Cocktail Den, WULF, on the website and all the socials, including LinkedIn. I branched out and put it into my LinkedIn this year just to merge all of my worlds together.
I love that. And I love seeing that content because it's such a refreshing sort of like different piece of inspiration that I get from those piece of content than I do from just any other sort of educational marketing piece of content that I see on LinkedIn. So I love that you're doing that. And so if folks want to know a little bit more about that, how do they find out about that?
Sure. We are on all the socials, so Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, Pinterest is a little neglected, but it's there. But everything's under Wolf Cocktail Den. So WULF Cocktail Den, like that's the social handle. And then the website's the same thing. Or my LinkedIn. If you find me, there's a path to everything. LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And we do post every Friday night. We have a tradition. So we started having a cocktail every Friday night. And then one Friday night, my husband said, let's post on LinkedIn with a picture and ask people what they're drinking. And it's turned into this, especially on Facebook, it's this little worldwide community where every Friday night we share out a drink. And there's a core group of people that every Friday night post pictures and share what they're drinking, and people engage and swapping recipes. And so it's been a lot of fun.
I love that. And just for my itch of curiosity here, which platform do you find that kind of content performs best on?
Strangely, Facebook is extraordinarily good for us, and Instagram are the strongest.
Okay.
And then interestingly, in my personal LinkedIn, I don't see a ton of engagement, but I get asked more and more by people that have seen the content who are like, oh, what are you guys having for your Friday night cocktail? Or, oh, I know you did cocktails. And my husband jokes in his day job too. He sometimes get asked more questions about beverages than my regular job.
Hey, I think it's a great foray into something that's just a little bit different and has some strong alignment still, but is very much really scratches that creative itch that I get a lot of time. And so it puts me into my creative mindset where I can just be like, oh, wow, okay, let's look at these recipes. Let's look at all the different kind of like drinks that we can make up with all these different ingredients. So I love that content. I think it's fantastic.
That's nice to hear, because my on the marketing and like the testing side, we joke I'm his official taste tester because I get to sample everything when he's creating something new. It's not a bad job to have. So it was interesting to get, because I love marketing, I always have. And so public sector and tech, I really enjoy it, but it's very different to be more in the consumer focused side of things. So it's been fun to get to do both and use the different parts of your creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to think that's somehow two halves of the same brain you're able to access and on parallel paths is just incredible. And having that experience in consumer and B2B and B2G, all of that builds into some incredible experience that really shows in what you deliver. So I'm sure folks really appreciate that. For folks that have listened in this week, please reach out to Lisa. She's fantastic. If you want to know what she's drinking for Friday cocktail hour, reach out to her and ask. If you are curious to know more about her marketing skills and the way that she puts her talents to use for companies, please find her on LinkedIn, reach out. We'll put that link in the show notes, and we'll get your website in the show notes as well. And don't forget to share, subscribe, and come back next week for next week's episode of GovCon Unscripted. It was great talking to you today, Lisa. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. You have a great rest of your week. And for everyone out there, don't forget to do your part, leave a heart, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of GovCon Unscripted with your host, Chelsea Roberts. Do you have a GovCon story or need guidance in government contracting? Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn to be a guest on the show or to enhance your business strategy. Don't forget, your network is your net worth. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your growing GovCon community.